Downing Street sent out to bat one of the Prime Minister's most loyal colleagues, Grant Shapps. He's the Transport Secretary. You might remember that in 2019 he was one of those organisers of his campaign to become leader of the Tory party. So I began in an interview we did a little bit earlier today by asking him what had gone so wrong for the Tory party that somebody who was elected on the coattails of Boris Johnson in 2019 just couldn't bear to sit on Tory benches anymore.
Well, look, you'd need to speak to the MP in question. I know that Berry elected a Conservative MP for the first time in a very, very long time. And I would argue that in the last 2 or 3 years, Berry has had more done than for the 20 or 30 years beforehand, where it was represented by another party.
On the basis of that, then, you think that basically he's sort of actually committed an act of fraud on his electors and there should be a by-election?
Well, they certainly voted for him. They voted for a Conservative MP. I have read his words of the past, where he said that where MPs defect, there should be a by-election. I leave it in his words.
But why don't you call for one?
Well, unfortunately, the way these things work, as you well know, is once you're elected, and a lot of people don't realise this, you are electing the individual, and it's then in their hands. But as I've just said,
but you can make a political gesture and say he ought to do the morally decent thing.
I just said it. Of course, he should submit himself to the people of his constituency. He has, flipped away from a party that is levelling up, that is delivering, as I was describing, a huge amount for Berry and in his Berry South constituency. So, yeah, I think he should front up to his constituents, for sure.
I mean, he also described the leadership of Boris Johnson, of your party, as disgraceful. And actually, all of you have been apologising to a greater or lesser extent for how he misjudged that party, haven't you? Yeah,
but look, I think in some of the coverage of this, it's as if people are sort of suggesting that the Prime Minister is some sort of flippant man. He's out there holding events. I'll tell you about Boris Johnson because I've got to know him working in his cabinet. This is a guy who works unbelievably hard, who literally never stops. I remember the morning I thought cabinet would be cancelled. His mum sadly passed away the afternoon before, and there we were first thing in the morning. He has said that he made an error of judgment. He's apologised for it. He has a diary that presumably is like mine, but 100 times busier as Prime Minister, where the day's split up into 20-minute segments, and he was asked to thank civil servants who have worked incredibly hard.
Sure, of course. Look at this.
And he goes out and he does it, and he said,
of course, what you say is completely factually, accurate. But I can't imagine you, Grant, turning up at a party at that time and not saying to those people there, sorry, this is a party, you've got to go back indoors. I mean, I'm sure you would have said that, wouldn't you?
And in the Prime Minister's own words, as he said, he should have recognised the people.
He should have, but he didn't, Grant. He didn't do that, did he? He said, what does that tell us about him, that he didn't do that?
I'll tell you what it tells us about it. It tells us he's human. It was an error of judgment. His diary obviously included thanking civil servants who've worked incredibly hard. He should have stopped and got back in, and he said all of that. And I think that's the sort of, we are all human. People make mistakes.
David Davis, a former minister who served under Thatcher as a minister and every single Tory Prime Minister since then. And, I think arguably is the most sort of senior in terms of experience of any of your backbenchers. And, I mean, he launched a savage attack on the Prime Minister for being somebody incapable of taking personal responsibility. You can't just dismiss what David Davis has said, can you?
Well, it's for each individual to decide, of course.
Would you not respect David Davis?
I do, actually. I like David Davis, but I don't agree with him, which is a different matter. And the reason is, I've described you cut me off, but I was describing how without this Prime Minister, we wouldn't have got these vaccines out. But here's another thing. We wouldn't have home testing. I don't know of any other country that does that.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly says he takes responsibility for these mistakes, but Downing Street is briefing out that taking responsibility means sacking other people in Downing Street. In what way is that the Prime Minister taking responsibility?
Well, again, you say they're briefing out. I've not seen anything like that. The reality is the Prime Minister came to the House and said, I take personal responsibility.
So how has he done that? But how has he done that? Give us an example of how he's taken responsibility.
I was there. He stood at the dispatch box and said that he does. And I know that you want to...
But is saying taking responsibility, I thought taking responsibility meant you had to do something to show the error of your ways. What's he done?
Yeah, well, apologising is a good start. Setting up the Sue Gray inquiry and providing her with all the facts and access to everybody to get all the facts is the next thing. And of course,
it is words, though, isn't it, Grant? It's words. It's not deeds.
I don't think so. And look, I just want to say I completely understand why people would look at that and be very, very concerned, notwithstanding the fact it's sometimes presented as if it was some sort of, rave going on. And it was, in fact, I think, as I understand it, thanking people for their work. But it shouldn't have happened, and we understand that. But actually, by the way, I couldn't see my dad for 4 months during coronavirus. We thought we'd lost him and I'd never see him again. I get why people are angry about it. But the reality of it is also that there are many, many other things going on in our world that we will now need to tackle, including, Europe potentially on the verge of mechanistic war between two nations.
But David Davis makes the point, which many of your colleagues agree with, that confidence in the country has slipped away from the Prime Minister, that week after week that he stays in office, more letters will go in, and that by the time he goes, this is David Davis's words, your party will be damaged beyond repair.
Well, I just don't agree. And, here's why. I saw unemployment this week was down to 4.1%. Your viewers may not have noticed it because I've barely seen it covered. These are numbers of people in work, higher, I think I'm right in saying, than before coronavirus, more job vacancies than were available for sure before coronavirus. That's a sort of quality of life issue, as is being able to get your vaccine. And now, as announced today, with moving back to Plan A, being able to go out again.
But look, you're a free market person. Everybody accepts that the support you put in place for the economy was. But I understand the point that you say about the support you put in place help the jobs market to recover. But are you also taking responsibility, therefore, for the massive squeeze on living standards that we're seeing? Jobs are one thing, but if somebody's in work and they can't afford to pay their fuel bills, that is pretty awful.
Yeah, of course we know there's an inflation peak coming through. We've seen. But
you're not doing anything about it, are you, Grant?
Well, that's not true. I was going to point out that it's global. It's higher, for example, in the United States. But to say we're doing nothing about it's untrue. Just give you one example. We have increased, for example, the living wage to make sure that keets pace with where inflation is.
All the analysts are saying...
And you have to look at inflation over the year.
OK, you're not going to give me a policy that's going to help people cope with these living standards. But we've got to get on to the easing of COVID restrictions. Is that it? COVID restrictions are going. Is the battle over?
I think that, we've been fortunate to be able to do this because of the booster programme. And the reason I say that is if you look at the data, sadly, in France or in the United States, you'll see that as Omicron went up, the number of people in hospital went up, but so did number of people in ICU and on ventilators. And we've broken that link by having the boosters. So I think yes is the answer to the question.
I'm going to ask you one question in your patch. This is going to be a shock to you, which is this. Given the progress that the Prime Minister believes is there in beating COVID, why on earth do people coming to the UK still have to take lateral flow tests? Pointless.
Well, we always said that we'd review it at the end of January when Omicron came along. We intend to do that, and so stand by. I do want to see the world return to one where we can all travel and we don't have to take endless tests. I want to make sure we are kept safe, of course, but I'm very much on the side of people being able to travel, and that's why I'm the Secretary of State for Transport, of course.
Grant Shapps, always good to see you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thanks.